September 1944, Nazi Germany faces defeat. The Führer blames the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, under the command of World War I fighter ace Hermann Goering. The once proud Luftwaffe is running short of pilots and fuel. In the air, the Allies have total superiority. With Goering in disgrace, Hitler's protege and Minister for Armaments, Albert Speer, seizes the initiative. He orders the German aircraft industry to produce a new fighter to destroy the marauding Allied bombers. This new plane must be simple to build using slave labor and simple to fly by newly trained pilots. It is to be mass-produced like the Volkswagen car in thousands per month. With every remaining able-bodied adult male needed in the army on the Eastern Front, the new plane is to be flown by teenage boys of the Hitler Youth. These pilots will be trained hurriedly on gliders. Because the sands of time are running out for Nazi Germany, Speer declares the new fighter must be designed, built, and put into production in the space of only 90 days. The new fighter will be called the Volksjäger, or People's Fighter. Professor Willy Messerschmitt, designer of the legendary 109 fighter of Battle of Britain fame, refuses to participate, saying it is impossible to create an aircraft in such a short period. But there is a German aircraft designer willing to take up the challenge. He is Messerschmitt's arch-rival, Ernst Heinkel.
Ernst Heinkel was a grand old man of German aircraft. He'd been building aircraft since World War I. He had a unique way of selling these planes. He had a hunting lodge outside of Berlin, and he would get the Luftwaffe High Command and the Air Ministry personnel, and they'd shoot stag, and then they'd have a good food and drink and get drunk, and then he'd sell them the airplanes. Willy Messerschmitt, almost certainly a serious Nazi, a different man, an intellectual scientist. He built his aircraft as scientific implements. A number of other companies took part in the Volksjäger competition. The big Junkers company produced a design which had essentially a jet engine in a pod with two wings stuck on. It would never have been stable in flight. It was a silly project. Then there was the Blum & Voss company, who were shipbuilders, but over the years they'd begun to produce rather curious aircraft designs. They tried another all-wing jet pod device, and that actually came quite close to winning.
After the HE-178, Heinkel built the world's first jet fighter, the HE-280. It flies in 1941. But the Luftwaffe High Command do not see the new jet as urgent, and it is not put into production. Hitler's eyes are on a blitzkrieg attack on Russia. Propeller-driven fighters such as the Messerschmitt 109 will do for the planned short war in the East. Germany will waste a crucial 2 years before turning to jet fighters to counter Allied bombing. When later Hitler demands jet fighters to regain the initiative against Allied bombers, it is not Heinkel's project, but that of Willy Messerschmitt that is ordered into production, the shark-like Me-262. But difficulties in perfecting the revolutionary new jet engine delay the introduction of the 262 into combat till after Normandy. German fighter ace and head of all fighter forces is Adolf Galland. He is convinced that if only he can get enough 262s, he can destroy so many American B-17s, the Allies will call a stop to their bombing campaign. But production of the 262 is slow because it requires scarce metal and 2 revolutionary jet power plants which are difficult to build. Germany needs a fast jet, powered by only one engine, a plane constructed from wood and simple materials that are easy to come by, the Volksjäger.
The Volksjäger was built with wooden wings for simplicity and because they were short of materials, though it's got an aluminium body. You had therefore to glue the wings and the tail onto the rest of the aircraft, and unfortunately the one bit of German technology that never seemed to work even by the end of the war were the glues, and a whole series of aircraft, including the 162, tended to fall apart because the glues weren't strong enough. The 162, or at least the first designs of the 162, do have structural problems. The tail is too short, the back end of the fuselage body is too short, and so that tended to create all sorts of gyrations in flight, which in the hands of a bad pilot could get out of control and the aircraft would come apart. However, I think it's wrong to condemn the aircraft out of hand. If you build an aircraft so that it's totally stable in flight, then you can't dogfight with it and kill other fighters. The best fighters are unstable, and therefore what you need to add is a good pilot to make sure that you can use that instability to good effect.
Galland opposes Speer's new jet fighter. He argues it cannot be built in time, and it can only be flown by experienced pilots, a commodity Germany is fast running out of. But he is not reckoned on Ernst Heinkel. Working round the clock, sleeping beside their desks, Heinkel's team design and build the first Volksjager in only 74 days. The Volksjager was powered by a single BMW 003 jet engine, positioned on the top of the aircraft. This unusual position meant that complicated and heavy ducting could be eliminated. It also meant engines could be changed quickly in the field. The body of the Volksjager was metal, but the simple wings were wooden and contained fuel tanks. Unusual for combat aircraft of the period, the HE-162 was fitted with an ejector seat for the pilot. Also rare then was the nose-wheel undercarriage. The aircraft was armed with two large 20mm cannons with 120 rounds per gun. One shell from these weapons could disintegrate a US B-24 Liberator bomber. The Volksjager had a maximum speed of 562 miles per hour and was faster than the Me-262. Deep under the mountains of central Germany, Speer built a vast, secret underground factory complex. Buried under millions of tons of solid rock, it is safe from Allied bombing. Here will be built three Nazi wonder weapons: the V-1 cruise missile, the V-2 rocket, and the Volksjager. The first HE-162 was rolled out and flown for the first time on December 6, 1944, reaching a speed of 522 miles per hour at 20,000 feet altitude. On December 10th, it is displayed to the Luftwaffe High Command, with Flight Captain Peter at the controls. Tragedy occurs. The wooden wing disintegrates and the plane crashes, killing Peter. The cause is the poor quality glue used to construct the wing. But Speer would allow nothing to stand in the way of mass-producing the Volksjager. In March 1945, the first 80 aircraft were completed. By the end of April, 200 more were ready. In May, the month the war ended, 500 Volksjager would have rolled off the assembly lines. And 1,000 per month would have been built starting June 1945, only 6 months after the first flight. To fly these planes, training of Hitler Youth pilots began on gliders. To ease the transition to the Volksjager, Heinkel supplied a two-seater glider version, the Model S. Without its BMW turbojet, the Model S lacked the distinctive humpback appearance of the fighters. The undercarriage was fixed and not retractable.
The idea behind the People's Fighter project was to train thousands of Hitler Youth to fly these things. Now that was obviously a silly idea. It's a very complicated aircraft to fly. If you're an expert, as the final pilots were, it worked. But if you had very little experience on any kind of aircraft, never mind a fast jet fighter, you would have been dead. Strange enough, one unit of Hitler Youth did become operational with the 162 in the closing weeks of the war. Unfortunately, all the records have been lost, so we don't know how they actually fared in combat.
Conversion training to the Combat 162 was handled at a flight school in Vienna, headed by Heinkel's technical director, Karl Frank. The first regular Luftwaffe Volksjager fighter group, JG-1, became operational at Lech in Germany in April 1945, with 100 aircraft organized in 2 wings. It was commanded by Oberst Herbert Eilfeld. The first operational mission was flown on April 26, 1945, only days before the end of the war. Because the pilots lacked experience with the new plane, Flight Lieutenant Reichberger was shot down but escaped uninjured. On May 4, 1945, the People's Fighter drew first blood. Lieutenant Rudolf Schmidt shot down a British Royal Air Force fighter. It would be the Volksjager's only kill. World War II ended 2 days later.
Well, it was tested by senior British pilots after the war, and they gave it a very good bill of health. They said it was a very stable gun platform. They said because it was small, it would have been very difficult to hit by Allied fighters. So all in all, if it had got into production in a big way and got into action in a big way, it might have caused a lot of damage. Indeed, the senior British jet pilot of the time said that it would have run rings round a British meteor.
Would the Volksjager have tipped the balance in Germany's favor if the war had gone on longer? Ernst Heinkel was already planning more advanced versions of the Volksjager. If the war had lasted into 1946, these are the planes the Allies would have faced. For extra speed, a swept-wing version was already under construction. The tail was also modified into an elegant butterfly shape to improve performance. With a new, more powerful jet engine, this HE-162 would have been a match for 1950s U.S. jets like the F-86 Sabre. Another planned version of the Volksjager was one fitted with 2 ramjets of the kind used by the V-1 cruise missile. When the V-1 was catapulted into the air at great speed, air was forced into the jet nozzle. This combined into an explosive mixture with low-grade gasoline suitable for a lawnmower. The result burned like a blowtorch. Fitted with 2 of these crude engines, this version of the HE-162 would have been a kind of manned V-1. It was planned as a last-ditch weapon if normal jet fuel ran out. Most exotic of all was this version of the Volksjager, with forward-swept wings. Not till the 1980s would NASA fly such a plane. But it was not to be. On May 8, 1945, the Volksjagers of JG-1 were captured by advancing British forces at their base at Lech. The combat days of the People's Fighter ended with the surrender of Nazi Germany. But we can now reveal that the HE-162 Volksjager was still to play a major part in post-war aviation history. After World War II, the French leader General de Gaulle was anxious to rebuild the French Air Force. The key was to be the Volksjager's engine, the BMW 003. The designer of this jet engine was Dr. Hermann Ostrich. As the Nazi regime collapsed, Ostrich escaped into neutral Switzerland. There he set up a company to continue his work. To disguise its origins, the company was called a French name, Atelier Technique Aéronautique Rickenbach, or ATAR. In December 1945, General de Gaulle's government paid for Ostrich and ATAR to move to France with 120 colleagues from his old BMW team. Using BMW's Volksjager jet engine technology, Ostrich quickly designed a more advanced engine. This was test run southeast of Paris in 1948. Versions of this engine were used to power early French fighters such as the Dassault Mystère and the twin-engine Voiture. By an irony of history, France supplied these aircraft to Israel during the 1950s when American aircraft were embargoed, thus allowing the Israeli Air Force its victories over the Arabs. Ultimately, a development of Ostrich's Volksjager engine powered the famous Dassault Mirage supersonic jet fighter. The Mirage would also employ another invention of the German wartime aviation industry, the delta wing developed by Walter Lippisch. Imagine what Adolf Hitler's Luftwaffe might have done with such a powerful engine in an HE-162 with forward-swept wings for speed. It was not to be. After the largest tank battle in history at Kursk in 1943, the Red Army rolls relentlessly toward the very border of Germany. The Luftwaffe uses the famous Ju-87 as a tank buster. But by 1944, the Stuka is obsolete, too slow to evade fighters of the Red Air Force. What is needed to stop the Russian tanks is a new Stuka, powered by the revolutionary new jet propulsion.
You're watching secret Luftwaffe aircraft of World War II on the History Channel.
The dive bomber was invented in America by Glenn Curtiss, who built sturdy biplane dive bombers for the U.S. Navy. September 27, 1933, Buffalo, New York. Fate is about to play a strange hand. Visiting the Curtiss plant at Buffalo is Germany's greatest living World War I fighter ace, Ernst Uday, now a senior figure in Hitler's new Luftwaffe. Glenn Curtiss invites Uday to test flight a